Earlier this week, I was looking at two completely different headlines that came out within about an hour of each other. The first one, from CNBC, was, quote, "The S&P 500 and NASDAQ close at fresh record highs, lifted by the tech rally." And then, right below it, literally on the same feed, headline number two, "More than half of Americans report living paycheck to paycheck."
Which, honestly, if you've been to the grocery store or tried to fill up your gas tank lately, that second headline is the only one that feels remotely real.
Exactly. But here's the wild part, honey. Neither headline is lying. They are both completely factually accurate at the exact same moment. And welcome to Talk and Wonder, by the way. I'm Frank, she's Lynn, and this weird, almost dizzying gap between what Wall Street is celebrating and what regular families are actually feeling around the dinner table, that's what we're untangling today. Because the very first myth we have to dismantle is this deeply ingrained idea that the stock market equals the economy. It doesn't. In fact, it never has. When people say the economy, they usually mean like, can our neighbors find decent work? What does a carton of eggs cost? How much of your paycheck is getting swallowed by rent or a mortgage?
Right, basic day-to-day survival.
Right, but the stock market, specifically something like the S&P 500, it only measures one thing, the expected future corporate profits of the 500 largest publicly traded companies in America. That's it. It has zero interest in how hard it is for a college grad to land an interview. And look at the data right now. The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which has been tracking how everyday Americans feel about their finances for over 75 years, recently touched a record low. It was actually lower than during the depths of the 2020 pandemic and even lower than the 2008 financial crisis. In that survey, 57% of people cited high prices as directly eroding their living standards, with supply disruptions pushing gasoline higher and just quietly draining household morale. Meanwhile, hiring is crawling along at its slowest pace in over a decade.
And yet, corporate earnings are somehow breaking records?
They're booming. In the first quarter, 84% of companies in the S&P 500 beat their earnings estimates, and overall earnings are projected to grow between 17 and 24% this year. But here's the catch, and this is the number everyone needs to understand. The top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 now make up nearly 40% of the entire index. To put that in perspective, back at the absolute peak of the dot-com bubble in the year 2000, the top 10 companies were only 26%. Today, just two companies, NVIDIA and Apple, account for 14% by themselves.
So when we hear the market is ripping, it's not the whole market.
Not even close. 490 companies could be having a totally flat, mediocre year, but if just 5 or 6 mega-cap tech giants have a massive day, the evening news still screams all-time highs, which naturally begs the real question, what on earth is fueling this handful of tech giants to the moon while everyone else is treading water? Well, it turns out, it really comes down to one single line item on corporate balance sheets, capital expenditures, or what Wall Street just calls CapEx. If you look at those top 10 companies driving this entire rally, 9 out of the 10, basically everyone except Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, are hyperscaling tech giants: Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, Meta, Oracle.
And when we say CapEx, we mean literal physical infrastructure, right? Not just software?
Exactly. It's the real cash spent to buy, build, and upgrade long-term physical assets, data centers, specialized cooling, power grids, and of course, warehouses packed wall-to-wall with NVIDIA AI chips. But here is the jaw-dropping scale of it. This year alone, a tiny handful of these hyperscalers are on track to spend roughly $800 billion. Some estimates even push it past $1 trillion on AI infrastructure alone. Now, to put $800 billion into some kind of perspective, because a trillion is just an abstract number to most of us, the entire annual gross domestic product of Sweden is around $760 billion. That means 5 American tech companies are spending more cash this year building server racks than a whole developed nation of 10 million people produces across its entire economy in 12 months.
Wait, that's insane. It's literally like the government of Sweden walking up to every single citizen and saying, hey, forget groceries, forget roads, forget healthcare. We're putting every krona into GPUs.
Pretty much. But here's where this whole story takes a really strange turn, and I actually need to clarify something I mentioned earlier. Remember how I said the stock market is disconnected from the real economy? Well, yes, but this AI spending spree has become so gargantuan that it's actually started artificially inflating the official GDP numbers. When analysts pulled apart the Bureau of Economic Analysis data for the first quarter, they found something chilling. AI-related CapEx was responsible for roughly 3/4 of all U.S. economic growth. If you strip out that data center spending, real growth was sitting at roughly 0.5%. In plain English, our broader economy was basically flatlining.
So when Washington announces the GDP grew by over 2%, it didn't mean families were getting raises. It just meant tech giants poured concrete for server farms.
Precisely. The GDP calculation treats a $1,000 server rack the exact same way it treats a $1,000 pay bump for a nurse, and that creates a painful paradox. Because these tech companies are reallocating massive budgets away from human headcount and funneling it into compute power, entry-level hiring across the country is down 6% year over year. Young graduates can't find jobs because the money that used to fund salaries is now paying the electric bill for AI clusters. Which brings us to the most critical, uncomfortable puzzle in this whole setup. If all of this historic spending is driving record corporate profits, but everyday paychecks are frozen, where is all that newly created wealth actually landing? Who's pocketing the gains? Well, when you look at the Federal Reserve ownership data, wow. The Federal Reserve numbers make it crystal clear why this rally feels so completely invisible to normal households. The top 1% of Americans by net worth now own 50% of all public equities. That is $27.6 trillion sitting in a tiny cluster of brokerage accounts. And if you zoom out just a little bit to the top 10%, they control more than 87% of the entire market.
Which leaves, barely 13% for the other 90% of the country?
90% of Americans are splitting 13% of the pie. And at the very bottom, the lower 50% of the population, they own literally 1% of the stock market. Now, financial pundits love to cite that statistic that 58% of American families own stock. And sure, technically that's true on paper, but they don't own enough of it to move the needle on their daily lives. The median American family who actually owns stock holds about $52,000 worth, and almost all of that is locked away in a retirement account or a 401k that they can't touch without penalties. So when the S&P rips 10% in a year, that median family sees a paper gain of about $5,200. It's nice, but it doesn't pay for tomorrow's groceries. Meanwhile, that exact same 10% gain for the top 1%, that translates to $2.7 trillion in liquid, spendable wealth.
Right, because for most families, like our neighbors or people we know, almost their entire net worth is locked in their home equity, and you can't exactly swipe your front door at the checkout counter.
Exactly. A house takes 30 to 60 days to sell, involves inspections, escrow, mortgage payoffs. It has zero liquidity. But when a multimillionaire's stock portfolio surges by 500 grand in 3 years, that money hits the real economy instantly. And this is where economists start talking about the famous K-shaped economy. Mark Zandi, a chief economist over at Moody's Analytics, pointed out a fact that he himself called astounding. The top 20% of households, families making around $175,000 or more, now account for nearly 60% of all consumer spending in the United States. 60%! Their spending grew 6.5% year over year, comfortably crushing inflation. But the bottom 80%, their spending grew only 2.6%, which means after inflation, their actual standard of living is flat to negative.
That is wild. So the entire retail economy, travel, new car sales, it's being propped up almost entirely by people whose portfolios did the heavy lifting.
It literally is. The typical top 10% household saw their brokerage balance jump from $624,000 in late 2022 to well over $1.1 million recently. That's an extra 500 grand without breaking a sweat. They aren't looking at grocery price tags. But for everyone else, real hourly wages fell 0.3%. Credit card debt hit an all-time high, and personal savings crashed below 3%. And this is where economists say the K-shape isn't even accurate anymore. It's mutating into something much more dangerous called the E-shaped economy. Because in the classic K-shaped economy, the top pulls away and the bottom struggles, but the middle class was always the anchor. They kept their spending steady, bought the reliable family sedans, paid their mortgages on time, and acted as the shock absorber that kept the broader economy from tipping over into a tailspin during rough patches.
But in this new E shape, the middle bar is slipping?
Exactly. The middle prong represents everyday middle-class families like our friends David and Sarah, who are technically still employed and paying their bills, but they are purely treading water. They've absorbed the $4.12 gas, the inflated insurance premiums, the grocery bills, and they're one unexpected transmission failure or a single bad quarter away from having to slash their discretionary spending to zero. And if you look at young adults aged 18 to 29 who absorb this strain worse than anyone, auto loan and credit card delinquencies have nearly doubled over the past year. So, right now, the entire stability of U.S. consumer spending is basically resting on the shoulders of the top 20% who feel rich because their tech stocks went to the moon. And that creates three massive structural risks that Wall Street doesn't really like to emphasize on television. Risk number one is extreme concentration. Our entire GDP growth and retail momentum are essentially hostage to a single trade. If tech stocks hit a rough patch and high earners feel slightly less wealthy, there is literally no one underneath them with enough spare cash to catch the falling knife.
Because the bottom 80% are already tapped out.
Completely tapped out. And that brings us to risk number two. The CapEx math actually has to produce real revenue. Research from top institutional analysts found that the gap between what tech companies are spending on AI infrastructure and the actual revenue AI is generating is currently sitting at roughly 46%.
Wait, Frank, stop. The gap between spending and actual revenue is 46%? Wasn't the peak of the dot-com bubble only around 32%? Are you serious right now?
It's true. Back in the late 90s, telecom and internet companies overbuilt fiber optic cables before the demand was there, and that spending gap peaked at 32% before the hangover set in. Today, we're building $100 billion data centers on the promise of future monetization. If those enterprise revenues take 5 or 7 years longer to show up than Wall Street expects, that math is going to get very uncomfortable very fast. Add in risk number three, which is interest rates staying stubbornly high, with bond markets pricing in lingering Fed pressure, and you have an economy balanced on a very narrow ledge. Now, look, I'm not sitting here telling you the sky is falling or predicting a crash tomorrow. Nobody has a crystal ball. But the structural reality is undeniable. The machine is running on asset ownership, not paycheck growth. Which brings us to the only question that actually matters for your family's bank account. If the game is fundamentally tilted toward ownership, how do normal people actually play it without getting crushed? Well, the strategy is surprisingly simple. It really all anchors back to one brutal mathematical law. Wealth in the modern economy is tied strictly to ownership, not labor. If your only financial engine is trading hours for a paycheck, you are on the losing side of this equation, because inflation and automation will always eat your margin. The economic system is literally engineered to funnel newly created wealth to the people who own the underlying productive assets.
Which sounds intimidating, but ownership isn't some secret club locked behind a velvet rope anymore.
Not at all. Opening a low-cost brokerage account or a Roth IRA takes, literally 10 minutes on your phone? There are no minimum balances, index funds charge almost zero in annual fees, and you don't need a Wall Street pedigree. But you do need a very specific, disciplined playbook. And the first rule is to focus ruthlessly on what is actually inside your control. You cannot control gas prices, you cannot control the Federal Reserve, and you certainly cannot control NVIDIA's next quarterly revenue print. But you can control the gap between what your household brings in and what goes out the door. Rule number 2, and this is counterintuitive, own the boring, broad market index funds. People look at the fact that 10 companies make up 40% of the S&P, and they think, well, the market is rigged, why should I buy an index? But that is the exact reason to buy the index. The top 10 companies in the year 2010 looked completely different than the top 10 today. Energy and legacy banks dominated back then. Tech dominates now. By owning a total market index, you never have to guess who wins the AI race over the next decade. Whoever rises to the top, you automatically own a piece of them.
But before anyone opens an app and starts buying shares, there's an essential prerequisite, right?
Absolutely. Rule number 3, build your emergency buffer first. When the national savings rate drops below 3%, meaning the average family is saving less than 3 cents of every single dollar they earn, that is why people get wiped out by a single bad week. Before you invest $1 in the stock market, you must have 3 to 6 months of living expenses parked in a safe, high-yield cash cushion. That is what keeps you from having to sell your investments at a loss when life happens. On average, the S&P 500 hits a fresh all-time high between 20 to 22 times every single year. The headlines are always going to look dramatic, but this massive economic machine isn't going to slow down and wait for us. The only real choice we get as families is deciding whether that machine is compounding for our future or running over our paychecks.
Couldn't have said it better. And as a quick, friendly reminder, we share these breakdowns purely for educational and conversational purposes, not formal financial advice. If this conversation helped you make sense of all the economic noise this week, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How are you navigating this weird market right now? Drop a comment, save this episode for later, and we will see you next time on Talk and Wonder.
Take care, everyone.